I'm going to talk a little bit about climate finance. This is finance from rich countries to help poor countries cope with climate change, to adapt to its effects and to curb their own emissions going forwards. If we just take a step back and look at what happened at the end of last year in Copenhagen, there were basically two commitments made. The first was, as I just said, to provide $100 billion a year by 2020. The second was a shorter-term pledge to provide $30 billion over the next 3 years through to 2012 of so-called fast start finance. And it's the fast start finance I want to focus on most in what I'm about to say. The good news is that the pledges on the table at the moment stack up. So if you look across what rich countries have pledged on fast start finance, it does add up to $30 billion. But there are really big questions surrounding transparency of the commitments that rich countries are putting forwards. For example, at Copenhagen, they pledged that fast start finance would be new and additional. But additional to what? There's no clarity about how different countries are measuring additionality. Developing countries believe that it should be measured as additional to aid promises, to the commitments that rich countries have made to provide 0.7% of their income in aid. Otherwise, all you're doing is simply moving money around from one place to another. But we don't have any transparency from rich countries so far on how that is going to play out. And an example I can give you very recently, which a number of you will be aware of, I'm sure, is the Canadian government's recent announcement to contribute $400 million in fast start financing towards the $30 billion overall commitment. But what we don't have yet is a commitment that that money isn't going to come from aid budgets. It isn't going to come from tomorrow's schools and hospitals. So it's very hard for us to welcome this commitment unless we know it really is new money. Another issue is double counting. We're very concerned at the moment that the fast start finance commitment that the US is currently applying for from the 2011 budget is actually going to be double counted with the L'Aquila commitments on food security that they made last year. We think there's a $400 million overlap between those two pledges. Other issues surround what form is the money going to take? Is it going to be loans or is it going to be grants? If you're giving developing countries loans to help them adapt to climate change, as a rich country, as a polluting country, it's kind of like driving your car into your neighbour's house and then offering them a loan to repair the damage. It just doesn't stack up. It's not fair. Other big questions about how much of the money has been dispersed. We don't know that. We know how much has been pledged, but that's a very different thing to dispersal. And through what channels it's going to be delivered. So that's issues around fast start financing, which we're hoping that the GA will make pledges to resolving and pledges towards transparency on. The other issue is the $100 billion, and here we move to the G20, because there are two things on the G20 agenda this weekend which are very relevant to how in the long term we're going to raise this $100 billion. The first is fossil fuel subsidies. If rich countries were to phase out polluting fossil fuel subsidies, that would free up an awful lot of money to spend on constructive things on the climate agenda, like climate finance. The other one is the financial transaction tax, which we know that the European Union, for example, is pressing very hard to have on the agenda. We think that a tiny tax on international financial transactions could raise something of the order of $400 billion a year. That's plenty to deal with climate change, it's plenty to deal with poverty in developing countries, and it's plenty to address budget deficits in the developed world. So those are the key issues that we're hoping to see on the agenda. If I could sum it up in 2 words, for the G8 it's transparency, and for the G20 it's financial transaction tax and fossil fuel subsidies.